G'day, my name's Pat Norman and I'm one of the Academic Liaison Librarians supporting the Business School. So today in this video we're going to cover a few of the basics about referencing using APA 6. This includes why and when you should reference, what APA 6 actually is, and how to reference using APA 6. One of the first things that we like to get people to think about before we talk about referencing is where ideas actually come from. So consistently when we ask this question in the sessions that we run in the business school, we find people saying things like dreams and nature, but they'll also say the internet, journal articles, libraries, books, and their lecturers. Information comes from a whole bunch of different sources. And when you're writing your assignments, you'll be using ideas, quotations, facts and figures that aren't your own. Referencing is that process of acknowledging the sources of information that you use in your assignments, and you should always reference whenever you're using information from another source. If you're ever in doubt, make sure you reference. So in an assignment, there'll be times where you're using specific dates, facts and figures, maybe statistics, or you're actually using ideas that you've got from another source. The only things you don't really need to reference in an assessment is common knowledge, or obviously your own interpretation and analysis. But how do you understand what common knowledge is? MIT says that, broadly speaking, common knowledge refers to information that the average educated reader would accept as reliable without having to look it up. In the context of the business school, we might say that Telstra is an Australian telecommunications company is common knowledge. But something like Telstra's market capitalisation or specific products that it sells wouldn't be common knowledge, so you'd have to provide a reference for those sources. So how do you determine if the information you're using is common knowledge? Well, MIT recommends you ask yourself the following questions. Who is your audience? What can you assume they already know? And will you be asked where you obtained your information from? Okay, so you have a rough idea when you need to reference, but why do we actually need to reference? Well, the main reason in university is to give credit to authors. Scholarship at university is a conversation. You're building on the work of other people, and in time, maybe they'll build on your work. So the first reason that we reference is to give credit to the authors of the work you've used. And referencing also shows all the research that you've done. Referencing is kind of like a shorthand way of signalling to your marker that you've actually engaged in thought and research before doing your assignment. And for that reason, well-referenced assignments often get better marks. It's not just because there are marks awarded for good referencing, but also because a well-referenced assignment indicates that you've given thought to where you've found your materials and you've done plenty of research. Another really important reason for referencing is, of course, to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking someone's ideas or work and submitting it as your own without acknowledging the original source of the work, and that's whether you did it intentionally or not. The University of Sydney uses a software package called Turnitin to check for plagiarism once an assignment is submitted. Turnitin will match the words that you've used in an assignment against a whole number of other sources and assessments that have been submitted around the world. Plagiarism is quite a serious offence at university, so you have to make sure you're referencing anything that you've sourced from somewhere else. While referencing correctly is very important, it's also important to make sure you're using scholarly research in your assignments. When we're talking about scholarly research, we tend to mean things that have been peer-reviewed, that always cite their sources, and these tend to be specialist research. However, not all the sources for your business assignments need to be peer-reviewed. Just for reference, peer review is the process where an academic will submit a research article to a journal, and two of their peers will anonymously review that article. In business, we're not always using peer-reviewed journal articles. The important thing, though, is to use quality sources in your assignments. There are many different types of sources that you'll be referencing in business, not just books, book chapters, journal articles and conference papers, but also business reports and sometimes even websites, particularly company websites or industry blogs. You should be referencing these sources using a specific referencing style. Different academic disciplines use a range of different referencing styles, but in the business school at the University of Sydney, we use APA 6. APA 6 was developed by the American Psychological Association. It's a standard referencing style used across many social sciences, and it's widely used around the world. And one of the main advantages to using APA 6 style is that the American Psychological Association updates it regularly to account for new types of sources that are out there. For example, tweets or YouTube videos. You'll be using APA 6 style in all of your business subjects, except for business law, which uses the AGLC style of referencing. There are two major parts of APA 6 referencing, the in-text citation and the reference list. So now I'm going to show you through these two types of referencing. An in-text citation, which you can see on the left of your screen, refers to the short citation that's placed within the text of your document. It's placed wherever you've cited information. It tells your reader which source you've used at a specific point in your paper, usually if you've quoted an idea, a fact, or a figure at that exact point. The reference list, which you can see on the right, is placed at the end of your document, and it's basically a detailed list of all the sources that you've cited in your paper. Any references you cite in text must appear in the reference list, and anything that's in the reference list must have been cited somewhere in the text. Here are two examples of in-text citation, shown in yellow. As you can see, the in-text citation is pretty short and contains only enough information for the reader to find the source in the reference list. You'll see the name and the year. This is an example of what a reference in the reference list will look like. It lists the complete bibliographic information of your source and should give your reader all the details necessary to find the source that you've used. There are a few rules on how to format a reference list. As you can see, a reference list needs a hanging indent. This means the second and subsequent lines of each reference need to be indented. The reference list must be arranged in alphabetical order by the surname of the first author, or by the title of the article if there's no author. And references with the same authors in the same order are arranged by year of publication, with the earliest year first. Okay, so let's talk about how to make in-text citations. There are several common types that you need to know about. All of them will include the author's surname as well as the year of publication. The first style of in-text citation is called author prominence style. This is where the name of the author is included in the sentence. You would do this if the author of the paper is really significant and it's important that their name is mentioned in your actual essay. The second type of in-text citation is idea prominent. This is where it doesn't matter so much who has written a paper that you're citing, and more that you're acknowledging where the information came from. So here you're emphasising the information or the idea that you've paraphrased from, rather than the author. For this type of citation, you put the author's name and the year of publication in brackets at the end. The next type of in-text citation is a bit of a cheat. You can signal to your marker that you've read different sources and you've understood that the information they contain can be synthesised together in a neat way. For example, technology is fundamentally changing consumer decisions, and this can often feel like information overload. If you'd read the Baines article, you would see that it was talking about how technology changes consumer decisions, and the Colville article talks about information overload as it relates to consumers' experiences of technology. These papers have different focuses, but they can be synthesized together in your essay. When you're synthesizing two sources together, the authors are separated by semicolons, as you can see here. And finally, if you're using a direct quotation of under 40 words, you need to make sure you include the page number as well as the author's surname and the year of publication in round brackets immediately after the quote. If you're using a direct quotation of more than 40 words, then you need to indent a block of text without quotation marks for that text. It's best to avoid direct quotations in the early stages of your study at university because your word limits are generally quite small and it's better to be paraphrasing things in your own words. What if there are multiple authors? The formatting changes a little bit if you have multiple authors. For two authors, you use the ampersand and symbol between them. For 3, 4, or 5 authors, the first time for an in-text citation, you'll include all of their names, and then every subsequent time, just the first author's name, and then this Latin phrase, et al., which basically means, and everybody else. One question that we get asked regularly is, what if the author you're using is citing another source themselves? This is a little complicated. Here's an example of some information that the author of an article you are reading has cited. The Asimacopoulos article is citing Boyd and Ellison, who are quoted there talking about web-based services. If you wanted to cite that quote from Boyd and Ellison, but you'd only read the Asimacopoulos article, you would put in brackets Boyd and Ellison as cited in, and then the citation that you have read. I mentioned earlier paraphrasing. Some people ask us what's the difference between quoting and paraphrasing. Well, I've got an example here. This is a quote. You can tell by the quotation marks that are enclosing this sentence. When a Facebook group focuses on students' personal needs, it enhances the importance of the Facebook group and surely increases visits and general activity. Directly copying a piece of sentence or text, word for word, is a quotation. Here you can see we've changed a few of the words. When a Facebook group concentrates on students' individual needs rather than focuses, it increases the importance of the group and increases most activity. This isn't paraphrasing or putting it in our own words. I've simply changed a few words around here. This is not proper citation. So really what I need to do is either stick to the original quote or paraphrase. A paraphrase might look something like this. What I've done here is put it in my own words. If you want some tips for how to paraphrase, one of the things I advise people to do is read the article and make your own notes. Then when you come to write your essay or report, refer to your notes, not to the original article. That way you're writing down the ideas in your own words. Another tip is to try explaining the article to a friend of yours without looking at it. Basically what you want to do is get away from the original text so that you know you're putting it in your own words. Okay, so now that we've looked at in-text citations, let's talk about the references in your reference list. A single reference is composed of a number of different parts. Generally, those elements are author names, dates, titles, and publication details. The format of these parts can be slightly different depending on what type of source you're referencing. So let's have a closer look at these parts. There are 4 key elements that you need to remember. Who created the source? The author. When was it created? The date, and this is usually just the year. What is it called? What's the title of the source? And where can it be accessed? And this isn't just, is it a URL, a digital object identifier, or a database, but also did it come from an academic journal? As mentioned before, in APA, each source type is formatted differently. So if you get stuck, just remember to use the APA guide on the library's website to find the correct reference type for particular sources. If you're ever in doubt whether your reference is correct, make sure your reference contains at least these 4 elements. So let's look at a few examples. Here we've got the parts that make up a journal article reference. When referencing a journal article, you'll need the following information: the surname, the year of publication, the title of the article, the title of the journal, the volume and issue numbers for the journal, the page references, and a digital object identifier if you can find it. A DOI is a unique ID that is permanently attached to an article, and it helps your reader easily locate that article on the internet. Students often ask when it's appropriate to use a DOI and when to use a URL. The short answer is, if the item you are referencing has a DOI, then include the DOI. It makes it much easier for a marker or another reader of your work to find that reference. DOIs are a permanent identifier, whereas URLs can sometimes change. But not everything has a DOI. Sources that have a DOI assigned to them are usually journal articles and sometimes ebooks. If you're referencing online content that doesn't have a DOI, like a website, then you'll need to use a URL. There will be instances where a DOI or volume issue number can't be found for a journal article. For example, when you've read something in print form and no DOI exists, then you just follow the reference format for those print materials and leave out the DOI. So this is what a worked journal article example looks like. As you can see, there's a lot of detail in a reference, and if you don't follow the right format for the referencing style, you may lose marks in your assignments. So you should always aim to get these details correct. But remember, you're not expected to memorize everything that you've seen in this video today. However, what you should remember is that you can always refer to the APA manual. Check the library website for our referencing subject guide, which contains all the different referencing styles that are used at the University of Sydney. Now, if you're referencing a website, it should look something like this. You'll have the author name at the start, the year of publication, the title of the website, and then the retrieval date and a URL. Technically, you don't need to include the retrieval date for websites that aren't updated regularly. If you're looking at a blog or a Twitter feed or something that does update regularly, it's best to include the retrieval date. This is the date where you access that information, just in case it changes before somebody else looks it up. If you can't find the author, you can use an organisation name or corporate author. For example, many of Telstra's web pages won't have an author, so you would just put down Telstra as the corporate author of those pages. And similarly with the year, if you can't find a date, don't use the copyright date at the bottom of the page, and don't guess the date. The date will be listed at the top of web pages that carry newspaper articles or blogs, but for some corporate pages you won't find a date at all. If that's the case, you should just use N.D. That stands for no date. Frequently in business assignments, we find that students are coming across web documents. This is a little different to a website. It's where you found a PDF or a Word doc that has been created online and is hosted on a website. The referencing style for this is slightly different. You'll include the author name and the year, but instead of a web page title, you'll include the title of the document in italics, and then the retrieval URL. Once again, if there's no author, you can just use the organisation name. One of the most commonly used scholarly sources in the business school is information from a company or industry database, like Passport or IBISWorld. At the moment, the APA guide doesn't have a specific standard for referencing these types of sources. However, generally the reference needs to contain at least the following information: the author or research organisation, the year and the publication month and date if it is provided, the title of the report or article, and then you'll include retrieved from and the name of the database that you retrieved it from. I'll show you an example here from Passport. Passport is owned by a company called Euromonitor International, and they're the ones who conduct the research for the Passport database. When citing a Passport report, you can identify either Passport or its owner, Euromonitor International, as a corporate author. You would then include the year of the report and the date, as this is provided, the title of the report, and then say retrieve from Passport database. Other databases such as IBISWorld will actually provide the name of the analyst on the front page of the report, so it's important that you include that in your reference under the author field. If you're citing an online newspaper article, which sometimes happens, you'll have the author name at the start, so the surname and first initial of the journalist who wrote the article, the year, month and day of the article, the title of the article, and then the title of the newspaper in italics. Then include the homepage of the newspaper. The reason you're including the homepage of the newspaper is because sometimes the URLs change for these newspaper articles. So it's better to help your reader navigate towards the article itself by providing the title of the article and the title of the newspaper. Here's a worked example of a newspaper article. Burke is the journalist, then we've got the year and date of publication, the title of the article, and then in italics the Sydney Morning Herald, followed by its website. So that about wraps it up. If you need more help, please see our referencing guide on the library website. There's a tiny URL on screen there for you, but you can also just go to sydney.edu.au/library and click the subject guides link just underneath the search box. And of course, if you're ever in doubt, feel free to email your academic liaison librarian. You can find the contact details for all of the business school's liaison librarians by visiting tinyurl.com/buzzlibhelp.